She walked into the room that night with nothing but her quiet grace and a sense of knowing, unseen, unnoticed, but always there. But by the time the evening ended, everything would change. Every eye would be on her, and not for the reasons they had first assumed. If you find yourself drawn to stories of quiet strength in the face of judgment, if you've ever felt underestimated but are ready to see someone rise above it, hit that like button and subscribe to keep up with the journey. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. The evening had already started to take its toll on me before I even arrived at the gala. The soft scrape of my heels on the marble floor echoed in the cavernous lobby of the private venue, the sound too sharp for my nerves. The sleek glass walls of the building towered above me, reflecting the city's lights in their pristine surfaces, as if showing off the wealth contained within. I paused for a moment to gather my breath, smoothing the simple black dress that hugged my frame. I had never felt out of place in the world of quiet luxury, but tonight, something about the sharpness of the women around me had unsettled me from the very first glance. And it wasn't just the women. It was the cold-eyed approval they shared, the unspoken critique that lingered in their smiles. I had been invited for the sake of a cause, my credentials as a volunteer organizer far outpacing any socialite's interest. But it wasn't the charity that kept me here. It was the allure of understanding, the whispered promises of connections to be made. As I moved through the room, trying to ignore the eyes of the others that followed my every movement, I noticed a group of 3 women. They stood apart from the rest of the guests, cloaked in designer labels that screamed wealth, labels I would never wear. Their laughter sounded different from the others, sharp and cutting, their voices carrying across the room with too much intent. I could feel their eyes sweep over me before their conversation halted as I passed, the shift palpable. Something about the way they regarded me felt invasive, as if they were measuring me against some unspoken standard, one that they knew I could never meet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong here, despite the impeccable invitation I had received. It wasn't a mistake, I told myself. I had earned this. Still, the weight of their stares stung, pressing into my chest like 1,000 unspoken criticisms. Don't let them get to you, I muttered under my breath, as I tried to focus on the grand decor of the room instead of the women's eyes that followed my every move. But that didn't work. Of course, it didn't. They were like hawks, circling, waiting for something to happen, waiting for me to falter. It was almost like they could smell the difference between them and me, the disparity between privilege and a life lived in quieter spaces. I reached the bar and found a small moment of refuge, ordering a drink, but not drinking it. The cold rim of the glass felt good against my fingertips. The clink of ice was a welcome distraction. As I took a slow sip, I noticed one of the women, a tall figure, her platinum blonde hair styled perfectly and her lips painted in a color so bold it could have been carved from rubies, approaching. She smiled at me, but it was the smile of someone who had already decided what kind of person you were, even before a word had passed between you. She stood too close, and I could feel the weight of her gaze on me. I stiffened slightly, my back tightening in discomfort. "You must be the new volunteer for the event," she said, her voice sweet and venomous at the same time. "I can't say I've seen you at any of the other galas. How long have you been involved in this world?" The air between us felt too thin, her words layered with something that felt all too familiar. It was the kind of tone reserved for someone you weren't sure whether to accept or reject, to mock or pity. I forced a smile. "A few months," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just here to help." "I'm sure you are," she responded, her eyes scanning my dress, my shoes, my very presence. It felt as if she was calculating something, dissecting me piece by piece to figure out where I fit into this world of glittering excess. It's so rare to find people like you in these kinds of spaces. I could feel my pulse quicken, but I didn't let it show. If you've ever been underestimated, you know exactly how it feels to have someone else try to define you before you've even had the chance to speak. It's a terrible thing, to be dismissed, to be seen for everything you're not, but it's also a fire, a challenge. And there was something in that fire, something that wasn't yet fully awakened. "Thank you," I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "But I believe everyone here has something to offer." She stared at me, her gaze lingering, and for a moment, I felt the weight of her judgment. It was a challenge I hadn't asked for, but one I would now have to face. The 3 women exchanged glances, their laughter dying down into something quieter, but still cutting. This was only the beginning, I realized. This gala wasn't just a charity event for me. It was the stage for something else. And I wasn't sure how it would end. As the evening wore on, the weight of their judgment still lingered in the air like a thick fog, making it hard to breathe. I tried to move past it, to focus on the purpose that had brought me here, the charity, the cause, the connections, but every step I took seemed to draw me back into the orbit of those three women. I couldn't help it. Their eyes followed me like hawks, assessing, measuring, waiting for me to falter. I didn't know how long I could keep up this pretense of calm, but I had to try. For myself, for the people I was here to support. A voice cut through the tension like a knife, deep and steady, but oddly familiar. "Is something bothering you, darling?" I turned, startled, and found myself face to face with Daniel West. I had almost forgotten he was coming tonight, though I had no reason to. He was my husband, after all. But in this world of grandiosity, where people flaunted wealth like a badge of honor, Daniel's presence was often subtle, quietly commanding. It wasn't until now, in the midst of the glittering crowd, that I realized just how out of place I felt among them. But not Daniel. His calm, unshakable demeanor was always a stark contrast to the world around him. He moved through spaces effortlessly, his presence both grounding and disarming. He smiled, a soft curve of his lips, and his eyes, those deep brown eyes that always seemed to see right through me, held an understanding that made me feel both exposed and safe at the same time. "You're late," I said, my voice a little too sharp. I hadn't meant to snap, but I could feel the sting of those women's words still gnawing at me. "I thought you'd be here much earlier." "I'm sorry," Daniel replied with a chuckle, clearly unbothered. "Had to attend a few calls. You know how it is." I nodded, my gaze flickering to the three women once again, who were now watching us with interest, their eyes narrowing as they took in the sight of Daniel and me together. "Looks like you're the main attraction now," Daniel said, following my gaze. His voice held a touch of amusement, but there was an undercurrent of something more. "I don't know what they want from me," I admitted, my throat tightening. "I've done nothing but try to help. They look at me like I don't belong." Daniel's gaze softened, and for a moment, I could see something in him that I hadn't seen in a long time. Vulnerability. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from my face in the way he always had when he wanted to calm me. "You belong wherever you choose to stand, Olivia," he said, his voice low, steady. "And if they don't see that, then it's their loss, not yours." The words should have comforted me, but instead, they felt like a small flicker of something more, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. A reminder that Daniel was not just my husband, but a force in his own right, capable of shifting entire rooms with his presence. "Let's not worry about them," he continued, his hand still resting on my shoulder. "How about we find a quiet spot, just the two of us? This is your night too, Olivia." I hesitated for a moment, glancing over at the three women once again. Their eyes were still trained on us, their whispers no longer subtle. I could feel the air in the room shifting, heavy with the weight of their silent judgment. But Daniel's hand on my shoulder felt like a lifeline, grounding me in the chaos. I nodded, finally allowing myself to relax as he led me toward a quieter corner of the venue, away from the prying eyes and cutting remarks. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as we sat down at a small, intimate table near the windows. The view of the city skyline glittered outside, a stark contrast to the discomfort swirling inside me. "Of course," Daniel replied, his gaze softening as he took a sip of his drink. "You deserve peace tonight, Olivia. You've worked hard for this." I took a deep breath, letting the stillness of the corner settle around me. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself to feel something other than tension, something more akin to relief. But it didn't last long. The sharp clink of high heels on the floor grew louder, and before I could even process the shift in the air, I felt the presence of the three women closing in on us. "Olivia," the woman who had first approached me said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. "I hope you don't mind, but we've been dying to meet your husband. I must say, I didn't expect him to be quite so charming." I glanced up at her, forcing a smile, but inside, a wave of anger began to bubble up. This was what I had feared, wasn't it? Not just the whispers and the side glances, but the way they were trying to turn me into a spectacle, a pawn in their social games. Daniel's posture shifted slightly, his body relaxing but his presence growing sharper. I could feel the shift in him too, the subtle power that had drawn me to him all those years ago. He didn't need to speak loudly to command attention. His stillness was enough. The women, sensing his presence, hesitated for just a moment. And that moment was enough. Before they could say another word, Daniel's voice cut through the tension with quiet authority. "Ladies," he began, his tone smooth but unwavering. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding. My wife doesn't need to prove her worth to anyone, and I don't believe she owes you any explanations." The air between us thickened, and I could feel the weight of Daniel's words settling in. The three women looked at him, their mouths slightly agape, but they didn't dare argue. As they turned and walked away, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, not with anger, but with something else. Something that had been buried beneath layers of self-doubt. It was pride, yes, but it was more than that. It was a quiet realization that, maybe for the first time, I didn't need to prove anything at all. Daniel's hand found mine across the table, and I looked at him, my eyes suddenly clear. "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier now. "You don't need to thank me," he replied with a smile. But it was my pleasure. As the evening unfolded, I could feel the whispers of the women, now behind me, fading into the background. The night had shifted, and for once, I felt like I belonged. The evening ended much differently than it had started. The once oppressive weight of judgment from the three women had dissolved into the cool air of the night, replaced by a quiet sense of victory I hadn't anticipated. As I stood with Daniel near the exit, I could feel the change in the room, a shift from cold critique to reluctant respect. The women had retreated, their whispered conversations turning into polite, distant nods as they passed. Daniel's hand on my back guided me through the crowd, and for the first time all night, I felt truly at ease. He didn't need to say much. His presence alone spoke volumes. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "You handled that better than I ever could," Daniel said, his voice soft as we stood under the twinkling streetlights. I smiled, finally allowing myself to breathe fully. I didn't handle it alone. Daniel squeezed my hand, his warmth grounding me. "You never will." As we drove home, the city lights flickering in the rearview mirror, I realized something. I wasn't just going to survive this world. I was going to thrive in it.